Hello and welcome to Kramer's Corner with a special edition where I will cover some of the most interesting stocks that are moving at the moment, most of them not in a positive direction to say the least. This video is for educational purposes only. There's no advice or recommendation whatsoever intended. So it's purely to demonstrate how I try to find support levels, trends, and patterns in the stock market, in the financial market in general. So let's just have a recap of what's going on in the Nasdaq 100. It has just opened, and it opened about 0.7% lower after being beaten a little bit yesterday, to say the least, and it seems to be continuing. We can see here, if you saw my update, we are headed for 23,000. So let's move on to the some of the components or constituents that are driving this. Let's start with the semiconductor industry that actually has been doing quite okay lately, but it seems like maybe they're starting to give in. It failed here to close above 345.30, which is a key resistance. It was above the cloud, was also above the 55 moving average, but we have negative sentiment, and that could change the picture. However, we do have some strong support here around 323 and especially 317. So if it takes out that, then we are in a bearish trend. 100 moving average and the lower part of cloud is giving it some support. But let's just have a look at some of the components or constituents in this index. Nvidia is not really what has been holding the sector up that much. We are actually in a bearish trend, negative sentiment, currently trading around 170 minor support, but there is now risk lower. We are below the 100 moving average there, and we could take out or at least test the lows here around 167, 164, which is really key support levels. We can see here on the weekly why it is. I mean, then there will be nothing holding it, to say the least. You can argue that this is a kind of a shoulder pattern, but it's a very complex one, so it's not that strong. However, 164 is really the key support level there to watch out for. Another one I want to highlight, and I know that's because a lot of people are trading it. I'm not invested in any of these, but I could have been. It is actually ARM Holding that a few days ago jumped much higher. And let's just zoom out a little bit on the daily chart and gapped up here. But it couldn't hold on, so it's starting to slide back, and investors are selling off again. And now we are digging into this gap area here, and that could be key. So if we move back below the 200 moving average, that could be, then it could really be a hard hit. So that will be key here the next week or so, next couple of weeks. What will actually happen? We have a gap here this morning, so that is not too good. However, we are still in a positive sentiment. So underlying, it is actually in a bullish trend, but be cautious if you are trying to cancel falling knives, and that's what it is at the moment. If we're moving on to the broader market on the tech scene, we have the illustrated by the ETF, the State Street Tech Select sector, and that is really looks quite heavy at the moment, as we can see, and it is digging into actually digging below the 134 support there. Did it yesterday. Here the weekly, we have 55 moving average. That's the 55 weekly moving average coming up. Could give some support, but it doesn't look too good. 127, 128 here. There is some support, and we can see where it comes from. We have this consolidation or correction area. This is actually the one we are looking for over here. So let's have a look at some of the components in that one, and maybe some that are not that much a component, but let's have a look at them anyway. We have Google here that has been sold off lately, dragging the overall index lower. We have some support here around 270, 271. but we could see a further selling. And let's just add a horizontal line there, and I saved some of the horizontal line to add until I actually did this video, so you can see what we are talking about. So we have some support areas. We have 270, 271 here. Then we have the 200 daily moving average coming up. We could see some bounce, of course, but we are in a negative sentiment. There's no divergence on the RSI. However, the RSI is also around 25. That's usually when it turns around, but it's not. It's probably not in an exhaustion just yet. Next one here, 256 area, and then it could drop all the way down to 236, 37, possibly. Then we have a consolidation area here going on there over there. So really quite heavy at the moment. We are in a bearish trend. Of course, there will be some bouncing, so keep an eye on that. But also here in a couple of weeks' time, we'll probably see 55 moving average crossing over the 100, and that is not a buy signal, to say the least. It's really a sell signal. So we can see also here on the weekly how much is selling off. Moving on to Amazon. Let's have a look at that. That has actually been doing quite okay, fairly okay lately. However, it is from a low point, so to speak. We had this, first of all, we had a breakaway gap there, a continuation gap. It couldn't close it to the upper side. I think it just touched, maybe it just touched the lower part there, just about. So what are we talking? 220.38, and there 220.47. So just touched it, and then it was rejected again. So really strong resistance, and that is a worry for if you are Amazon's shareholder. We could revisit the area around here, 197, these lows here, but also looking at the weekly chart, we can see why it's so significant, because we actually have a gap here on the weekly chart that goes back to, when was that? That was back in May last year, 2025. So if it closes this gap with a close below 193, well, then it could be dropping even further. So that's just the medium term, what it looks like at the moment. It could play out. I'm not saying it will play out, but we have negative sentiment on the daily and the weekly RSI indicating lower levels. To turn around this picture, it really needs to get back above and at least close this gap here, so meaning back above 222.70. That is the minimum requirement to really turn around the bigger picture. But again, remember, things can change. Moving on to other stocks like we have, where is it? Let me find it here. We have, what was it? There we are, Meta Platforms. I couldn't find it on my list that I have, but Meta Platforms. And look at that, massive sell-off yesterday, took it through 2 support levels and closed this gap there. That is really bad for them. So investors are really not happy with Meta. I mean, I have covered Meta many times over the past few months and past few years. So, but let's have a look what's going on. It's actually following through after the massacre yesterday, and it's just continuing, as we can see. And here on the weekly, there's really not much strong support until around the 482, 480 lows here, back from April last year. So it's in a free fall. So be careful. Don't catch a falling knife. I wouldn't do it again. It's not a recommendation. The only recommendation is be careful if you're trying to catch a falling. This is a catching a falling. Bottom fishing goes wrong 11 out of 10 times. Yes, I know it is more than one there. So 11 out of 10 times. Be careful. Wait for it finding a solid ground and then turn around. That's my advice. But again, I'm not advising anyone to buy it. Microsoft also really heavy, as we can see. It's really, really bad. We had a long time ago, last year, I talked about this double top pattern, broke below the support there, tested from the underside, and then it got badly beaten, and that has just continued. Only small breathing, small bouncing, and then sell off. And now we are getting closer to the lows here, 355, 345 support area here. We are below the 200 weekly moving average. I think we could see some bouncing. We could see a bottom maybe next week or just after Easter, around that time, and then I think we will see some bouncing, because I could imagine some investors coming in, maybe some really risky hedge fund guys coming in, maybe starting, okay, this is too much, it's too cheap now. So think about it. It was trading around 550, above 550, and now it lost $200. And once it lost possibly about 40%. Let's just measure it just from the peak to where we are now. So we are talking about 35%. So 40% could lose just in like a couple of months, 6 months time. And moving on to another one that is, of course, of many interest, it is Oracle, I believe. It has been hammered just for a very long time. I mean, 345, and it has lost more than 50% here. As we can see, we are headed towards 120, 118 down here, these low. Currently testing the 200 weekly moving average. I did an update a couple of weeks ago when Oracle broke out of this triangle-like pattern here and said it could be a bottom and reversal. I wasn't optimistic, especially also when it got rejected there, the 55 moving average, and especially when it moved back into the upper falling trend line. Then I said, well, that was not really convincing, and it's probably gonna move lower and bust this. So, and we are moving lower, and I think we'll take out the lows there from February around 135.25. I could see it dipping down. Again, it needs to take out these peaks here just to establish a bullish trend, and that's not nowhere near where we are. Another one that I want to talk about is I'm quite sure a lot of your listeners maybe have or had invested in it, but it's also a Torah town in many respects. Palantir. Oh yeah. Also sell off from the peak. It actually has this shoulder pattern. Maybe some didn't recognize it. Oops, that's not it. We need to draw, and this is how you do or recognize a shoulder pattern. First of all, you need a shoulder, and that you have a head, and then you have another shoulder, and then you have the neckline, which you can draw from these two valleys there. So that is actually not a bad shoulder. But it was trying to bust it by moving back above the neckline, but it didn't last for long, and now it's selling off again. To totally bust it, it will require it to take out the right shoulder, and that was a long way to go. But you should, of course, be very cautious when you see things like that. But because that could be a sign it will bust it, but it didn't. And now the sell-off has continued here the most of this week. After failing to get back above the cloud on a daily, rejected there at the resistance here, just around, let's adjust it, it spiked a little bit above 161.45, but it didn't get above the cloud, got rejected. Now we are back below the cloud. So negative sentiment on the weekly RSI, and I think we will see that also on the daily fairly soon. Strong support around 125.40. I think we could test that area. If it takes that out, closes below, well, then there's further lower levels. And let's round this off with Tesla. Let's have a look at Tesla. I know there are some many investors out there. I'm not one of them. It did break out at the falling trend line there, so we could adjust it a little bit, maybe. But again, that is not really the most important part, so let's just remove it. It's a little bit of noise, but we are in a bearish trend. We've been in a bearish trend, well, for the better part actually since January, and actually also before then. So it seems like it's quite heavy there too. There's potential down to 352, the upper part of that consolidation area here, and I think that's where we are headed at the moment. And I think we could see a bounce from around that area, but you can see how volatile it's been, and I wouldn't be surprised to see it pushing even lower. But again, a little bit of correction and then maybe pushing lower. Just to establish a bullish trend, at least short term, it needs to get back above that spike up there at 396 and a quarter, and that will be really a stretch or difficult for it to do. So it's not good news all around on these, but there are other good news that I mentioned in my daily technical update. Oil and on a not so good news background, of course, but this was just to have a look at some of the most popular stocks. All right, that is all for today and this week. Have a nice weekend, I hope, and be careful out there. Be careful not to do bottom fishing or catching a falling knife, and talk to you again Monday.